The silence after the storm. The dawn came without color. The sky above the Montana plains was washed in ash-gray light, and the wind carried the dry whisper of dust and sorrow. Mei Lin stood on her porch, barefoot, the cold wood beneath her feet biting into her skin. In her hands, she held a folded red silk dress, a relic from another life, one that still smelled faintly of camellia and rain. Her house was too quiet. The little shoes by the door remained untouched, the clay bowls on the table still half-filled with dried rice. 5 days had passed since the fever took her children, and the silence that followed had stretched like an unending echo. The doctor had called it a mercy of winter, but mercy, she thought, should never steal from a mother. She had buried them herself, because there was no one else. The townsfolk had left small offerings, bread, candles, a coin for luck, but they did not stay long. Grief frightened people. It reminded them that love could disappear faster than morning fog. Mei Lin's husband had been gone for 2 years, taken by a mine collapse in Wyoming. A letter arrived months later, not from him, but from a woman in Shanghai who claimed to have been his wife first. She enclosed his photograph and wrote, "He spoke often of the woman who waited for him in America. I am sorry." That letter sat folded in a drawer beside her wedding dress until the fever came. Now, everything she had built, her family, her trust, her belief in endurance, was ash. When the sun lifted higher, she put the red dress carefully into a wooden box, tied it with rope, and began walking the dusty road toward the Rowe Ranch. The walk took 2 hours. The land stretched endlessly around her, golden and cruel, and the wind bit her cheeks until she felt alive again, if only from pain. Ethan Rowe saw her coming long before she reached the gate. He was mending a broken fence, his hat pulled low against the glare. To him, she looked like a memory out of place, too fragile, too deliberate, a small figure carrying something heavy. He set down his hammer as she approached. Her voice, when she spoke, trembled between apology and courage. "Mr. Rowe," she said softly, "I was told you buy things. Tools, cloth, horses." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes," he replied. "Depend what it is." She lifted the box onto the fence post and untied the rope. Inside lay the red wedding dress, folded with aching precision. "I want to sell this," she said. "It's silk, good material. It was my mother's." Ethan looked at the fabric, the way it caught the sunlight, even through dust and wear. It was beautiful and heartbreakingly out of place on his rough wooden fence. "Why sell it?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, where the small crosses she had built for her children stood faintly visible against the pale sky. "Because I don't need it anymore," she said. Then, after a breath, "Because I need to leave." He didn't ask where. People with that tone didn't need destinations. They needed escape. Ethan ran a hand along the wood grain of the post, thinking. "I don't buy dresses," he said at last, his voice gentle. "But there's work here. The animals need feeding. The place needs tending. You could earn what you need." She hesitated, her hands still gripping the box. "You would hire me?" "I could use help," he said simply. A gust of wind swept between them, lifting a corner of the red silk and carrying it briefly into the air. For an instant, it shimmered like blood in sunlight before settling back down. Mei Lin nodded once. "Then I'll work," she said. Ethan opened the gate for her. As she stepped inside, he noticed the exhaustion etched into her movements, the way grief had slowed her but not yet broken her. He respected that kind of endurance. That evening, she slept in the small cabin behind the barn. The window rattled in the wind, and she could hear the low breathing of horses nearby. It was not peace, but it was the absence of fear, and that was enough for now. In the main house, Ethan sat by the fire, staring at the red dress folded neatly on his table. He had promised to keep it safe until she earned her pay. But as the flames flickered across the silk, he felt something stir in the quiet. An old ache, a recognition. His own wife had left 3 years ago, running off with his brother Daniel. He hadn't said her name aloud since. Now, in the silence of his ranch, he found himself listening for Mei Lin's footsteps outside, as if the sound of her grief could steady his own. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of dust and rain. Somewhere beyond the barn, a wind chime clattered softly. Mei Lin lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, her fingers tracing the faint pattern of the wedding dress that no longer belonged to her. She whispered to the darkness, 5 days, as if the number itself could turn back time. The chime answered, faint and trembling. Outside, Ethan looked toward the cabin light and thought, not of loss, but of the strange way sorrow could recognize itself in another's eyes. The storm had passed, but in its quiet wake, something unnamed had begun to breathe. The hands that remember warmth. The mornings on the ranch began in silence, broken only by the hum of wind through dry grass and the slow rhythm of hooves against soil. Mei Lin rose before dawn, her hands already knowing the motions, feeding, brushing, mending, moving. Work had become her prayer, a ritual to keep memory from consuming her. Ethan Rowe watched her from the distance most days, careful not to intrude. There was something deliberate about the way she moved, measured, quiet, as if every action carried the weight of remembrance. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words landed like soft stones, shaping the still water of his solitude. She had been there for 3 weeks. In that time, the ranch had grown steadier, cleaner, more alive. The animals responded to her calmness. Even the wind seemed gentler when it passed through her hair. But grief, Ethan knew, was not so easily tamed. One evening, as the sun bled behind the hills, Mei Lin stood by the corral watching the horses. Their breath steamed in the cooling air, and a light rain began to fall. She did not move. The water gathered on her lashes, glinting like glass. Ethan approached quietly, his boots sinking into the damp earth. "You'll catch cold," he said. She didn't turn. "Already did once. It took everything I had." He hesitated, unsure whether she meant illness or sorrow. The rain thickened, pattering softly against the wooden fence. Without thinking, he took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She didn't protest. For a moment, the world felt impossibly small. Just 2 figures, the hiss of rain, and the steady pulse of breath shared in silence. Later, inside the barn, they worked together to move hay and cover the feed bins. The horses shifted restlessly, their hooves thudding against the ground. When their hands met over a shovel handle, neither pulled away. It was a small thing, barely a second, but it rippled through Ethan like a sudden flame. He stepped back first, clearing his throat. "You can finish here. I'll check the north fence." She only nodded, her face unreadable. But after he left, she pressed her hand to her chest, as though something fragile had stirred there, something long dormant. That night, Mei Lin sat by the cabin window with a lantern beside her. The red dress lay folded neatly in the box by her bed. She had not asked for it back, though Ethan had reminded her twice. She wasn't ready. The sight of it comforted her, the last thing that had belonged to her before everything was lost. Through the thin glass, she saw the faint glow of the main house. She wondered what he did at night, if he read or prayed or sat alone with his ghost the way she did. Her thoughts betrayed her, circling him when she wanted them to circle home. In the house, Ethan sat by the fire with an old photograph in his hand, his wife and his brother, taken before the betrayal. He had never burned it, though he'd thought of it often. Now, as the flame flickered against the image, he felt less anger than resignation. Time dulled the sharp edges of pain, but it left the shape behind, permanent as bone. He set the photograph down and poured himself a drink. When he looked out the window, he could just see the faint candlelight from Mei Lin's cabin. A single, unwavering glow in the endless dark. He didn't know what to name the feeling that rose in him. Pity, protectiveness, or something far more dangerous. Days folded into one another. Their routine became a quiet partnership. He would bring her supplies. She would leave food by his door. Sometimes they shared a meal without speaking much. The conversation carried more by silence than words. She would hum soft melodies from her homeland, songs about mountains, rivers, and the ache of distance. Ethan found himself listening longer than he should have. Once, while she was hanging laundry, He caught himself watching the way the wind played with her scarf, how sunlight painted her silhouette in gold. The moment felt almost indecent in its tenderness. He turned away, ashamed of how human he still was. That night, a storm rolled through, loud and relentless. The power went out. When lightning cracked across the sky, Mei Lin startled awake. The wind tore open her window, and she hurried to close it, her hands trembling. Moments later, there was a knock on her door, 3 careful taps. "Are you all right?" Ethan's voice came through the storm. She opened the door halfway, her lantern light spilling onto the porch. His shirt was soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked at her, not as a rancher, but as a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't name. "I heard the window break," he said. "It's fine now," she murmured. "You didn't have to come." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. The wind howled between them. She stepped back, just enough for him to see her face, tired, pale, and softer than he'd ever seen it. "Storms sound different," she said quietly. "In China, we believed thunder carried the voices of ancestors. Here it just feels empty." Ethan didn't answer. He wanted to say that emptiness sometimes made room for new things, but the words felt dangerous. Instead, he said, "I'll fix the latch tomorrow." She nodded. Their eyes lingered too long. Then she closed the door gently, the storm swallowing the rest of their silence. Back in his house, Ethan lay awake, listening to the rain and the restless creak of the barn. Somewhere beyond the noise, he thought he could still hear her humming, soft, sorrowful, and impossibly near. He turned toward the window, watching the faint orange flicker of her lantern through the dark. And for the first time in years, he wished the night would never end. The confession beneath the sky. The first sign of change came with the dust. It rose along the horizon like a memory returning, slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Ethan Rowe paused mid-stride, his hand stilling on the corral gate. He knew that dust cloud that shaped that sound. Daniel was back. By noon, the younger Rowe rode up the dirt path, hat tipped low, his smile the same easy one that had once hidden 1,000 betrayals. The years hadn't softened him. They'd only made his confidence quieter, like a knife that had learned when to stay sheathed. "Brother," Daniel greeted, dismounting. "Heard the ranch was still standing. Didn't expect you to be." Ethan said nothing. His silence was armor. He took Daniel's horse by the reins and tied it without looking at him. The air between them hummed with the things left unsaid. The wife, the leaving, the apology that never came. From the barn doorway, Mei Lin watched. She recognized the tension instantly. Grief knew its own kind. Ethan's back was rigid, his jaw tight. Daniel's tone carried the same careless warmth that had once belonged to men who thought hearts were replaceable. Daniel noticed her then, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Didn't know you hired help," he said, wiping his brow. Ethan's voice was flat. "She's not help. She's here because she works harder than I do." Daniel grinned. "Then she's rare." He offered Mei Lin a polite nod. She returned it but said nothing, her eyes steady, unreadable. She didn't like him, though she couldn't yet explain why. His presence unsettled her, like the smell of smoke in a room that seemed safe. That night, dinner was strained silence. Ethan ate sparingly, his thoughts elsewhere. Daniel filled the quiet with stories from the road. New towns, new faces, the false laughter of a man trying to be remembered kindly. Mei Lin served food without looking up. When Daniel joked about the red dress he'd seen on the table earlier, Ethan's fork froze midair. "She's selling it," he said curtly. Daniel smirked. "Pity. Pretty thing like that shouldn't be for sale." Mei Lin's hand trembled slightly as she set down a plate. "Some things lose their meaning," she murmured. Daniel tilted his head. Or maybe they never had one. Ethan's eyes darkened. The old wound reopened, bleeding quietly. He stood abruptly, muttering, "I'll check the horses," and left before the silence could crush him. Later, Mei Lin found him outside, sitting on the fence, the moon low and heavy above him. The night smelled of sage and distance. "He hurts you," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "He's my brother. That's what brothers do sometimes." She hesitated, then sat beside him. The wood creaked beneath their weight. "Family should heal," she said. He smiled bitterly. "Then we failed the definition." The wind carried a chill. Mei Lin pulled her shawl tighter, her gaze fixed on the stars. "My husband had another wife," she confessed quietly. "I found out from a letter after he died. I thought death would make forgiveness easier. It doesn't." Ethan turned toward her. In the moonlight, her face looked carved from sorrow and strength. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head. "You didn't cause it. You just remind me that people still exist after breaking." Their eyes met. Two souls shaped by absence, circling each other without intent. For a moment, the distance between them felt smaller than the breath they shared. "Mei Lin," he said, her name sounding foreign and sacred on his tongue. "You don't have to stay here. Not if he makes things harder." Her reply came as barely a whisper. "It's not him who makes it harder." The truth hung there, fragile and exposed. Neither spoke again. The wind moved through the grass like a sigh. When Ethan stood to leave, she caught his sleeve. "Don't," she said. "Not tonight." He froze. "I can't bear another silence," she admitted. "Not after all the ones that took my children." He sat again, his heart thudding against the walls of restraint. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, and he let her. No vows, no promises, just a shared understanding that two broken people had found a moment of warmth in a world that no longer owed them any. The stars were cold witnesses above them. Somewhere behind the hills, thunder murmured faintly. Inside, Daniel watched from the window. His smile was small and sharp, a familiar cruelty returning. He poured himself another drink, muttering to the dark, "Always thought you'd fall for a ghost, brother." Outside, Mei Lin lifted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, lips parted as if to speak to the dead. "Maybe heaven still listens," she whispered, "even to those who've already sinned." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He only took her hand gently in his, not as a man claiming something, but as one who'd finally admitted what he'd already lost. When dawn crept over the fields, Mei Lin was gone from the fence, her shawl folded neatly beside him. Ethan stared at it for a long time, the fabric damp with morning dew. Somewhere in the barn, Daniel's laughter echoed faintly, a sound that felt like betrayal all over again. Ethan looked toward the road stretching east, toward the faint horizon that had swallowed her. He whispered to the empty sky, "Some storms don't end. They just change shape." And far away, beyond the hills, the first light touched the red dress hanging in the cabin window, like a promise waiting to be broken again. Ashes of promise. Spring arrived quietly, as if the land itself were afraid to disturb the ghosts winter left behind. The snows melted from the hills, and the rivers cut new paths through the thawing soil. On Ethan Rowe's ranch, everything looked the same. Fences, fields, the slow rhythm of work, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Mei Lin had been gone for 3 months, and silence had reclaimed the spaces she once filled. The cabin behind the barn remained untouched. Her shawl still hung by the window, the faint scent of cedar and rain lingering there. Ethan passed by often, though he told himself it was for maintenance. Each time, he lingered at the door, listening for a voice that no longer called. Daniel had left again soon after Mei Lin's disappearance. Their last conversation ended in bitterness. Ethan telling him to take his lies elsewhere, Daniel muttering something about not stealing the same woman twice. After that, the ranch belonged to quiet once more. Then, one afternoon in April, a letter came. The handwriting was neat, careful, Mei Lin's. The postmark read from a small town in Idaho. Ethan carried it to the porch before opening it, his hands trembling like he was unwrapping the last proof that she had ever been real. "Ethan, I hope the horses are well, and that the rains are kind this year. I left without goodbye because I could not explain what I didn't yet understand. I wasn't running from you, only from what I was becoming beside you, someone who remembered warmth more than loss. That frightened me. I sold the wedding dress in town. The buyer was an old man who said his daughter was to be married soon. He asked if it had been worn before. I told him yes, once by a woman who believed love could survive storms. It wasn't a lie. I am teaching children now. Their laughter fills spaces my grief used to own. It is not healing. Healing feels too complete a word, but it is living, and I am learning that is enough. You once told me storms change shape. You were right. Sometimes they return as rain that helps things grow. Mei Lin. The words blurred as he read them again and again. The ache they stirred was not quite sorrow anymore. It was something quieter, deeper, almost gratitude. He folded the letter carefully, set it beside the lantern, and went outside. The sky was bruised with clouds, the kind that promised rain but not ruin. He stood by the corral, the same place where she had once leaned against him beneath the stars. For the first time, he spoke her name aloud. Mei Lin. The wind carried it softly away, like a prayer that no longer demanded an answer. Life resumed its rhythm in the days that followed. The calves were born strong that spring, and the soil took seed without resistance. Mrs. Collins, the elderly neighbor, remarked that the ranch finally looked like a place meant for the living. Ethan smiled, but said little. He had learned that peace wasn't noisy. It was the steady sound of hooves in the distance, or the creak of a gate that no longer needed mending. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan rode out beyond the fields to the old willow by the river. He brought the letter with him, along with Mei Lin's shawl. The air smelled of water and wildflowers. He read the letter once more before tucking it inside the folds of the fabric and setting both beneath the tree roots. "Rest here," he murmured. "You were part of this land once. You still are." The wind rose briefly, teasing through his hair, and for a fleeting instant he thought he heard her voice, soft, uncertain, like the echo of a memory choosing not to fade. When he returned home, the first drops of rain began to fall. He left the cabin door open, letting the scent of wet earth drift in. The horses stirred, restless but content. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the red streaks of sunset smear across the clouds. And then, movement. Across the pasture, through the silver rain, he saw a figure walking along the ridge. A woman in a red dress. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as the figure paused, lifted her face toward the sky, and vanished behind the curtain of rain. He exhaled slowly. Whether it was a vision, a dream, or just his heart remembering, it didn't matter. Some ghost and haunt they guided. He whispered into the fading light, "Thank you." Outside, the rain deepened, washing the dust from the earth, softening every harsh edge. Later that night, Ethan wrote a short letter and left it unaddressed on his desk. "Mei Lin, I think I understand now. Love was never meant to fix what broke. It was only ever meant to remind us we could still feel. The dress was never about a promise. It was about letting go." Ethan, he didn't send it. Some letters were meant only to be written. When dawn came, the ranch glowed gold under the new sun. The fences glistened with dew. The horses moved like slow shadows across the field, and from somewhere near the barn, the wind chime began to sing. Ethan looked toward the sound and smiled. The storm had ended, but its memory, gentle now, would stay forever, like a red dress swaying softly in the wind, a symbol not of what was lost, but of what endured.